of initiatives, as indeed I should. One such initiative was an attempt to calm the impending thunder, the war that would eventually consume Liberia for nearly a generation, by reaching out to the opposition bent on destroying Liberia irrespective of the consequence. I placed a telephone call to Dr. Evans Sawyer one early March morning, 1986, at his hotel room in Falls Church, Virginia, United States of America. Dr. Sawyer and a group of self-styled prominent Liberians, including their foreign agents, supporters, and co-conspirators, were scheduled to meet members of the United States Congress to advocate, among other things, sanctions against the government and people of Liberia. I suspected then, and I have been proven correct by subsequent developments, that activities to destabilize Liberia were inevitable. My conversation with Dr. Sawyer that early March morning, 1986, was rather brief. He appeared startled that I had a number for the hotel room. I tried to calm the doctor that my interest was to assure him that I was not tracking him and his cohorts for any reason other than to suggest that the consequence of their planned action would be catastrophic, beyond imagination, and that neither they nor their supporters would have any control over the menacing tragedy once put into place. I tried to suggest ways we could together make Liberia a livable place for all. Unfortunately, Dr. Sawyer saw my attempt to reach out from another perspective. On April 8, 1986, as already mentioned, 3 weeks after my telephone conversation with Dr. Evans Sawyer, I took leave of government. I retreated to Zwedru and subsequently to put to my birthplace to continue farming activity, refusing, however, to become an unwitting recruit of the anti-Dole, anti-Liberia chorus. The thunder foretold by the lightning did blast. The National Patriotic Front of Liberia, NPFL, led by Charles Taylor, supported by Liberians of presumed distinction, amongst them Dr. Evans Sawyer, Harry A. Greaves Jr., Ezekiel Pajibo, Menyongai Rogers, Patrick L. N. Sayer, Madam Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, J. Mamadi Wote, all of them members of the executive board of an organization styled the Association for Constitutional Democracy in Liberia, ACDL, and many others, in violation of the Liberian Constitution, led an armed invasion into Liberia December 24, 1989. The same Liberian Constitution, previously violated with impunity, is now being treated by its violator, amongst them Mrs. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, as the law of the land. That these personalities, ladies and gentlemen, in their individual and collective state of disillusionment with development in Liberia, allowed themselves to be used by external interests to the detriment of this already ailing country is quite appalling, to say the least. When the MPFL struck on 24 December 1989, I was in a rather unique position to internalize the unfolding national tragedy with resolve and a calm temperament. The Liberia Peace Council, LPC, this is the organization that everyone is accused of doing all these heinous things. Let me now address the issue of the LPC, or at least let the world know what the LPC was about and what it did, for the record. Refusing to become a spectator of the unfolding tragedy in Liberia from the safe havens in the diaspora, Liberians of distinct characteristics and esteem embraced the notion of actively engaging actors in the Liberian conflict in and out of Liberia, especially those outside of Liberia whose judgment on development in the country have been prejudiced and skewed by a sustained campaign of disinformation. By April 1990, while the Association of Constitutional Democracy in Liberia, ACDL, was raising funds in America and around the world to prosecute the war in Liberia, the Liberia Peace Council, LPC, a committee for the restoration of constitutional leadership in Liberia, was formed by me and other Liberians for the purpose, as mentioned above, of engaging members of the international community to seek a peaceful, non-belligerent political solution to the crisis in Liberia. A few committed and good citizens subscribed to this approach. When the United States government, at the start of the NPFL incursion into Liberia, offered to host a meeting of parties to the Liberian conflict at the American Embassy in Freetown, Sierra Leone in early 1990, the LPC, at its own expense and considerable risk to its members, giving the antagonism toward anyone viewed as pro-government at the time, scouted the conference to gauge the prevailing sentiments. Let me remind you and those with short memory, or perhaps no memory at all, as the intent of the war and its supporters was to collapse the constituted government of Liberia. Anyone who chose to remain in Monrovia rather than flee the country to hasten the downfall of the government was treated with disfavor. The initiative of the Liberia Peace Council, LPC, was accordingly muffled, though the LPC intent against insurmountable odds was to offer an alternative to the escalating humanitarian tragedy in Liberia. Despite this unfair treatment, members of the LPC remained resilient, steadfast, traveling at considerable risk, at considerable personal risk, into hostile countries in West Africa. Example, the Gambia, Ivory Coast, and initially Togo, as well as other spheres of influence, London, New York, Washington, D.C., talking to anyone willing to listen to the other side of the Liberian story. For example, President Isembe Yedima of Togo, one of three West African leaders initially favorably disposed to receiving an LPC delegation in early 1990, changed his mind after a high-powered delegation from a powerful Western country met with him. Not only did President Yedima not grant LPC delegation audience, the NPFL came riding into Lomé, the Togolese capital, shortly thereafter, hosted by the Togolese government. In New York City, for example, in July 1990, representing the Liberia Peace Council, LPC, the People's Republic of China, through a very low-level staffer at the Chinese United Nations mission, informed me of China's displeasure with Liberia's violation of the one-China policy by according Taiwan, a province of China, diplomatic recognition. On the other hand, efforts to meet the United States ambassador to the United Nations, Thomas Pickering, proved unsuccessful. While many African diplomatic missions granted representatives of the LPC audience, others, including Burkina Faso and Cote d'Ivoire, for example, were openly hostile and unreceptive. In fact, at the Burkinabe consulate in New York, I was refused entry into the inner office of the consulate. These are few of the scars earned to promote peace in Liberia. Mr. Chairman and Commissioners of the TRC, it is interesting how easily Liberians forget or pretend to forget. Some Liberians often refer to the LPC as a rebel group or movement. A rebel, the last time I checked the dictionary, a rebel by definition is someone who opposes an established constituted government, ruling authority, or generally acceptable convention. I repeat, a rebel, by definition, anywhere in the world, is someone who opposes an established, an acceptable, or constituted government, ruling authority, or generally accepted convention. The LPC never led a rebellion or insurrection against any constituted authority. To the contrary, the LPC sought to restore constitutional authority in Liberia. Undeterred, we forged ahead, seeking resolutions of Liberia's crisis. By 1993, the LPC, earlier treated with disdain by some elements of the international community, could no longer be ignored, courtesy of the NPFL-ACDL rivalry. The LPC reaffirmed its conviction held at the inception of the Liberian conflict in written communication to United Nations Secretary General Dr. Boutros Ghali and the 15, Evans Sawyer was interim president of Liberia, and the 15 heads of state of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. Attached to this letter were copies of the ACDL's letter dated April 9, 1990, signed by Mr. Harry A. Greaves, Jr., soliciting funds for the NPFL-led incursion into Liberia. LPC's letter to Dr. Evans Sawyer of IGNO requesting his immediate resignation, and a memo by Dr. Evans Sawyer and Dr. Edward B. Kessley of the Liberia People's Party, LPP, and Unity Party, UP, respectively. The intent of the letter to the international community was to reiterate the position of the LPC that the NPFL-ACDL was one entity with unity of purpose, and that peace in Liberia will continue to elude the international community until and unless alternatives were sought to the existing peace formula in Liberia, for Liberia. Purveyors of the Sawyer-Kessley memo of 17 July 1990, presumably a response to Catholic Archbishop Michael Francis' proposed solution to the Liberian crisis, included His Grace, the Bishop Francis himself, Kenneth Y. Best, and his brother, Kenneth Burgess King. Kenneth Burgess Carr, correction. This is why anytime you see the Observer newspaper, I mean, Kenneth Best never care anything about, everything about LPC is negative. That's understandable. Bishop Francis' ambivalence during the Civil War, though regrettable, was understandable, even as the original purveyor of a proposal subversive of the constitutional government of Liberia. The LPC's letter to United Nations Secretary General Boutros Ghali and ECOWAS leaders with the appropriate supporting documents proposing alternatives to the United Nations ECOWAS supported peace initiative for Liberia reads, and I'm going to read all of these communications for the record, because all that you know is that LPC just a bunch of gun-toting, happy-go-happy young people who went around and just massacre people. I mean, that's what the world knows. So let me tell you what the real LPC is today. On 22nd April 1993, the LPC wrote the following letter to 15 African heads of states. And as I said, we wrote our own separate letter to Evans Sawyer and attached it also to this letter. The letter reads, and instead of giving you, 18 copies of this, I'll just read the letter to Jerry Rawlings, who at the time was chairman of ECOWAS, and give you all the supporting documents, but I will read them for the record. Liberia Peace Council, Committee for Restoration of Constitutional Leadership in Liberia, 22nd April 1993. His Excellency Jerry J. Rawlings, President of the Republic of Ghana, Accra, Ghana, West Africa. Your Excellency, we convey to Your Excellency the government and brotherly people of the Republic of Ghana our compliments and gratitude for your continuing interest for the welfare of the Liberian people as well as the peoples of the West African sub-region. We are cognizant of and grateful for the tremendous expenditures of human and material resources by your government for the welfare of Liberia. We are particularly proud of Your Excellency's exemplary leadership in the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, and your unfettered commitment to the ideals of the sub-regional organization. While it is true that some complexities have been introduced in the Liberian crisis over the years, the principal issue has and continues to be that of acceptable leadership in a unified Liberia and the legitimacy of such leadership. Your Excellency will recall that the ECOWAS communique of 7 August 1990, which was the basis of ECOWAS intervention in the Liberia conflict, especially mandated the transfer of power in the proper manner, quote unquote. Blurred by the events of the hour, a few Liberians who converged on Banjul, the Gambia, on 28 August 1990, formed an interim government of national unity without regard to ECOWAS mandate to assure requiring the proper transfer of power to such government. Mr. President, we hasten to assure you and your government that the Liberia Peace Council affirms and reaffirms support for the ECOWAS peace initiative in Liberia. However, we are obligated to engage Your Excellency and the leaders of ECOWAS, given the benefit of hindsight, to reconsider your support for the type of leadership for a unified Liberia that would be not only appropriate, but legal and embraced by the organic law of the land. An instrument, excuse me, about which there is unanimity among the vast majority of the Liberian people. Excellency, the Liberian Constitution has never been suspended nor abrogated. Its application, therefore, under the circumstances such as now exist, in our view, would be most timely, logical, legal, and would adequately address the problem of acceptable leadership, thus bringing about timely resolution or restoration of law and order. We must, as a people, appreciate and respect our laws, values, culture, and institutions. As Liberia prepares for free and fair elections, internationally supervised and monitored, the Liberia Peace Council believes that the restoration of constitutional leadership in a unified Liberia would do the following. 1. Make it politically unprofitable for warlords bent on seizing power in circumvention of the constitutional process. 2. Serve as disincentive, save for personal vendetta for individuals, institutions, or governments contemplating the disruption of democratic institutions. 3. Serve notice to Liberians and other peoples similarly affected that the solution to our problem lies in our resolve to subscribe to basic, universally acceptable democratic principles. We believe further, sir, Mr. President, that this approach would also A. Discourage proliferation of armed militia vying to seize power by force of arms. B. Discourage local politicians fond of orchestrating, inciting, and perpetrating discord to gain political favor. And C. Become a precedent in solving conflicts arising under similar circumstances in other West African countries where multi-party constitutional democracy is evolving. Your Excellency, we pray that the collective wisdom of the leaders and leadership of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, will find our concerns worthy of consideration. Enclosed for your perusal, sir, is a copy of our communication to Dr. Evans Sawyer, President of the Interim Government in Monrovia. Excuse me. Please accept, Your Excellency, the assurances of our highest consideration. Respectfully yours, G.E. Boley, Senior Chairman, signed. Attached to this letter is the following document. Association for Constitutional Democracy in Liberia, April 9, 1990. Executive Board, Harry A. Graves Jr., Ezekiel B. Pajibo, Momo K. Rogers, Evans Sawyer, Patrick L. N. Sale, Ellen Johnson Selig, J. Mamadi Wati. This letter, dated April 9, 1990, addressed Honorable Clarence Simpson Jr., Alexandria, Virginia. Dear Minister and Mrs. Simpson, as you have probably heard, Liberia is in the midst of a war of liberation spearheaded by our compatriots, the National Patriotic Front of Liberia, against the barbarous, tyrannical regime of Master Sergeant Samuel Doe, self-proclaimed President of Liberia. The war commenced on December 24, 1989 in Butuo, Nema County, and has been raging since then at varying levels of intensity. At first, Doe mistakenly took what was essentially a guerrilla action for the normal run-of-the-mill coup and dispatched a massive force to crush it. His troops were ambushed and totally routed, with casualties reportedly running into several hundreds dead. His reaction to send in reinforcement with others to shoot at anything that moved. Example, unarmed men, women, and children. The resulting mayhem has caused the disappearance of entire villages and the flight of over 150,000 Liberians into Guinea and Cote d'Ivoire. As I write you, the NPFL has captured and is holding a large swath of land stretching from the Ivorian border down as far as Bunk County. A few weeks ago, they overran the military barrack of Wadro, I assume it's supposed to be Zwetro, in Grand Jida County, that was being used to train new recruits for Doe's army and immobilize the Gantahapo Road. Lately, word has reached us that NPFL forces are descending upon Banga, capital of Bunk County, and a mere 3 hours drive from the nation's capital, Monrovia. All independent reports indicate that the NPFL advance is gaining momentum, and it seems now just a matter of time before the action reaches Monrovia, the seat of Doe's government and the probable site of the final battle, if, that is, Doe chooses to flee rather than, or if Doe chooses to fight rather than run away in his new $20 million Boeing 707. Over the course of the past few years, we have been striving for the replacement of the present military dictatorship with a genuinely democratic government, grounded in the Liberian Constitution and legitimized through legitimized through free and fair elections. Master Sergeant Doe's track record convinces us that these goals cannot be achieved while he is head of the government. That view appears to be shared by a vast majority of Liberians, including the victims of the current refugee community, including the victims of the current conflict. Let me get some more of them, man. Throw the statements. That view appears to be shared by the vast majority of Liberians, including the victims of the current conflict. For all independent reports we have received from refugee community emphasize the fact that they too feel that they would not be able to return to their peaceful lives until the brutal reign of terror of Master Sergeant Doe is over. That is why the current initiative must not be allowed to falter or fail. The memories of the aftermath of November 12, 1985 are still fresh in many of our minds. We remember all too well the terrible price that was paid by combatants as well as non-combatants at the hands of those murder machines. That lesson must not be repeated. So far, all of us who love Liberia, citizens as well as friends of Liberia, active participants in the struggle as well as silent supporters, it is time to redouble our efforts. There is light at the end of the tunnel, and it is beaming brightly. What we need now is to summon up our last reserves in order to hasten the exit of the Master Sergeant. That is why I'm making this personal appeal to you to make a generous contribution, $20, $50, or $100, whatever contribution you wish to make to the cause. Checks and money orders should be made payable to ACDL and mailed to P.O. Box 3835, Merrifield, Virginia, zip code 22116. Your donation will be treated in the strictest confidence. If you wish to make a separate contribution to the fund we have established for providing relief to the refugees, make your check or money order payable to ACDL Refugee Fund. Our attorneys, Mrs. Lichman, Treister, Singer, and Ross, have applied for tax-exempt status for ACDL under Section 301C3 of the Internal Revenue Code, which, when approved, will be retroactive to December 1988. Thank you for your support. Yours sincerely, Harry A. Grace Jr., Treasurer. Attached also to the communication to the heads of state and the African leaders and the UN was this letter, which we had sent to Dr. Sawyer. And it reads, Liberia Peace Council, Committee for Restoration of Constitutional Leadership in Liberia, 22nd April 1993. Dr. Evans Sawyer, President, Interim Government of National Unity, Monrovia, Liberia. Dear Dr. Sawyer, the crisis in Liberia is now in its fourth year because of the stalemate between your interim government and the National Patriotic Front of Liberia, NPFL. Both you and NPFL remind us about the story of the two thieves who succeeded in robbing the king, destroyed the kingdom, only to disagree on how to share the loot. You and the NPFL certainly succeeded in destroying Liberia, thus effecting the collapse of the constituted government. As a reminder, we enclose two memos by you and your kind, evident of your role in support of the NPFL-led armed incursion into Liberia. We must remind you also, however, that those institutions and organic laws which form the basis for our system of government, irrespective of personality, are still in force and must be acknowledged by all, including you. As we seek to unify our country and build hope in our displaced and dispirited people, your resignation as head of the Monrovia-based interim government of national unity and support for the restoration of constitutional leadership in a unified Liberia may, in our belief, help bring about some measure of genuine reconciliation amongst us all. Regards, yours, G.E. Boley, Sr., Chairman. Attached also to this document was a memo by Dr. Edward B. Kessler of Unity Party and Evans Sawyer of the LPP. Again, circulated by Archbishop Michael Francis, Canon Burgess Carr, and Mr. Kenan White Best. Dated 17 July 1990. Subject: reactions to your proposals for resolving the current crisis in Liberia. We congratulate you for your initiative and fully identify with you in this effort. Below is our input, which has been formulated in consultation with members of the Unity Party and LPP personally in the US, Europe, and other parts of Africa. 1. The starting point of all considerations about the future of Liberia is the removal of General Doe's regime, either through Doe's resignation or otherwise. 2. The purpose for seeking the removal of the Doe regime is to set Liberia on a course toward democracy by demonstrated commitment to the rule of law, respect for human rights, and the Liberian Constitution. 3. Just as it is a high patriotic duty of Liberians to do everything within their powers to support the efforts to remove the Doe regime, it is also a high patriotic duty to ensure the replacement of the Doe regime by an interim regime that will be committed to holding free and fair elections under conditions that meet current international standards and are fully acceptable to the Liberian people. 4. The National Patriotic Front of Liberia is to be commended for its efforts to remove the Doe regime. Clearly, the efforts of the front have built upon the protracted struggles of all democratic and human rights forces which have confronted the Doe regime, exposed its excesses, and delivered numerous body blows, body punches, which have left that regime weak, vulnerable, and truly discredited locally and internationally. In recognition of the current initiatives taken by the front, it is only appropriate that the National Patriotic Front be accorded the opportunity to organize an interim government in view of the fragility of current circumstances and the immediate need for healing, national reconciliation, and reconstruction. It is expected that the front will seek to organize an interim regime that reflects these concerns. However, failure of the front to do so should be wholly unacceptable and constitute no basis for alarm. Nevertheless, Liberians need to be ever vigilant and ensure the holding of free and fair elections within a given time frame. Number 6. Since the question of free and fair elections has become an issue in putting Liberia on the course to constitutional democratic rule, we propose the following of the Doe regime, the interim government of the National Patriotic Front, as such be constituted, shall clearly and unambiguously commit itself through a public declaration to holding free and fair elections under international supervision no later than the second week of October 1991. 6b. Towards this end, the front, upon assuming power, shall call a roundtable conference of all political parties, including those from whom an illegal ban was recently lifted by the Doe regime, and others to be subsequently organized. The purpose of the roundtable conference will be to organize a commission that will be responsible for revising the election laws and procedures and setting up terms of reference for the appointment and operations of a national electoral commission. 6c. In view of the bitter experiences of the Liberian people resulting from the 1985 elections, in which the head of an interim government was chief supervisor of the electoral process, the repository of the monopoly of state power, and the contestant in elections, all the same, it is imperative that no candidate for presidency, vice presidency, or the legislature be an official of the interim government. Some may argue that the real question is respect for the general rules and not the motives and ambitions of the individuals. The fact remains that the major bone of contention and the cause of the hideous acts of repression in Liberia today can be traced directly to the question of respect for ground rules, which could be subverted in the absence of adequate institutional checks. This letter and the attached references were sent to the following African leaders of ECOWAS and the Secretary General of the United Nations at the time, Dr. Boutros Ghali. The letter went to the following: His Excellency General Nesemwe Iyedema, President of the Republic of Togo; Excellency Captain Valentine E. M. Strasser, Chairman, National Provisional Ruling Council, NPRC, and Head of State, Republic of Sierra Leone, Freetown; Excellency Blair Compaoré, President of FASO, Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso; Excellency Alpha Omar Konari, President of the Republic of Mali, Bamako, Mali; Excellency Moa Onsad Ahmed Tayi, President of the Islamic Republic of Mauritania, Nouakchott, Mauritania; Excellency Dengu Excellency Nicéphore Sokolo, President, Republic of Benin, and Chairman of ECOWAS, Authority of Heads of State; Excellency Félix Houphouët-Boigny, President, Republic of Côte d'Ivoire, Abidjan; Excellency Lansana Conte, President and Head of State, the Republic of Guinea, Conakry; Excellency Antonio Montorio, President, Republic of Cape Verde, Piera, Cape Verde; Excellency Wa Bernardo Vieira, President, Republic of Guinea-Bissau, Bissau City; Excellency Mohamed Ousmane, President, Republic of Niger, Niamey; Excellency Alhaji Sir Dauda Kariba Jawara, President, the Gambia, Banjul; Excellency Abdou Diouf, the Republic of Senegal, Dakar, Senegal; Excellency Jerry John Rawlings, President of the Republic of Ghana, Accra; Excellency General Abraham Banamisa Bambagida, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Abuja; Dr. Evans Sawyer, Interim President, Interim Governor, National Unity, IGNO, Monrovia. These documents are on record in the respective countries as well as in the office of the Secretary General of the United Nations. I failed to see, Mr. Chairman of the TRC, members of the Commission, and fellow Liberians. I failed to see how these initiatives by the LPC translate into violation of human rights and violation of international humanitarian laws as alleged by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Liberia. To the extent necessary and possible, the LPC cooperated with the international community, including the peacekeepers, to ensure the restoration of peace in Liberia. The LPC was not a gang, as previously mentioned, a gang of trickle-happy hoodlums, as the TRC and some members of the international community, including some human rights groups, prejudiced by ignorance and preconceived notions of events and developments in Liberia, would have the world to believe. To the contrary, the LPC was a respectable, focused organization of individuals committed to restoring peace to our common patrimony and succeeded in doing so. Mr. Chairman, members of the Liberia Truth and Reconciliation Commission, there's a lot to be told that time simply would not permit. However, I would not have done justice to my conscience and the hundreds mainly children and the aged, sentenced to death in Monrovia because Mrs. Dorothea Dix, director of the Self-Food Program, prohibited delivery of life-saving food to the victims, not because their location was inaccessible or unsafe, but because she had the power to kill them by denying them food. And die they did, by the hundreds, daily in the Barclay Training Center, BTC, in central Monrovia. Their bodies were dumped into the Atlantic Ocean. The only crime these people committed, by Dorothea Dix's reasoning, was that they were considered the wrong kind of Liberians. They lived in the BTC, took refuge in BTC, or found themselves holed up in the BTC in central Monrovia in the heat of the NPFL-led armed incursion into Liberia. Dorothea Dix, now deceased, was the sister of Bishop Ronald Dix, then Bishop of the Lutheran Church in Liberia. While we understand that the Lutheran Church in Cinco, of which Bishop Dix was bishop, was the scene of an alleged massacre attributed to the armed forces of Liberia, the national army trained by previous governments. Not everyone who sought refuge or holed up at the BDC was a party to any alleged misdeed of the AFL. To starve innocent children and the elderly to death was a criminal act. Many people in this country, certainly many people in Monrovia in 1990, probably including some of you on the commission, can attest to this act of inhumanity by Dorothea Dix. Somehow, Mr. Chairman, members of TRC, this colossal act of inhumanity committed by Dorothea Dix and others, many of whom are still alive, seems not to qualify as a violation of international humanitarian law, nor is it a violation of the human rights of those who lost their lives as a consequence of Dorothea Dix's criminality. Not one of you in this hall or your international human rights colleagues, to my knowledge, ever protested the crime perpetrated by these cowardly miscreants against those innocent people holed up at the BDC. I must also mention there are few decent people in this country, you know, people of conscience. Not everyone supported Mrs. Dix in this act of cruelty and inhumanity. Some members of her staff, at considerable risk to their lives and the lives of their family members, courageously disregarded Ms. Dix's death orders and eventually delivered desperately needed food to the BTC, thereby saving some lives. Some of these unsung heroes survived the war in Monrovia. I see them around town each day, as well as those whose lives were saved, those who survived Dorothea Dix's death sentence because of the heroism of these few persons of conscience. Mr. Chairman, we have a long story. This country is sick. We're all sick. We need to get well. The role of the clergy, the Edwin Kind story, Agapane story, plenty story, true story. Anything I tell you that is true, man, true story. I will take the liberty to share with you and your audience yet another reason why this reconciliation process in Liberia, done in a non-partisan, non-sectarian, objective, and prudent fashion, is essential to healing the spiritual as well as the physical injury occasioned by this conflict. Very important. The experience of Edwin Kind is a case in point. Edwin Kind is a talented, skillful Liberian was a devout Catholic by faith who, by no choice of his, was born a member of the Kran ethnic group. Mr. Kine worked at various jobs before his employment with the Bureau of Immigration and Naturalization in Liberia. At the onset of the Liberian War in 1990, Edwin Kine, like many Liberians, fled to Sierra Leone and returned to Monrovia only after the peacekeeping force ECOMOG landed in Liberia. Unemployed, unable to support his family in Monrovia, this proud and honest Liberian sought employment with the Catholic Diocese of Monrovia. At the job interview conducted by Bishop Michael Francis of the Catholic Diocese, of the Monrovia Diocese, Edwin Kine told Bishop Francis he was of the Kran tribe and had previously worked at the Bureau of Immigration and Naturalization. Double jeopardy, the bishop exclaimed without further elaboration. Edwin Kine was denied a job, denied equal employment for work to support his family. Confused and distraught, Edwin Kine left the Catholic Church, became a Jehovah's Witness. I have always believed, Edwin Kine would later lament, the church is not supposed to be biased. Article 18 of the Liberian Constitution, adherence to which Bishop Michael Francis is not exempt, states, all Liberian citizens shall have equal opportunity for work and employment, regardless of sex, creed, religion, ethnic background, place of origin, or political affiliation, and all shall be entitled to equal pay for equal work. The Edwin Kine Bishop Michael Francis episode is an example of the polarization of our society in post-conflict Liberia, an issue we should not overlook. While this is not an indictment of the various denominations in Liberia, I know from personal experience the role of several members of clergy during this conflict in Liberia, namely Bishop Arthur Kula of the Methodist Church, Roland Dix of the Lutheran Church, Bishop Michael Francis of the Catholic Church, among others, during the Liberian conflict. They suggest a new approach to the church-state paradigm in post-conflict Liberia. Constitutional transgressions. Mr. Chairman, members of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Liberia, while we take pride in adhering to international laws and conventions, including international humanitarian laws, it is about time Liberians adhere to their own domestic statutes and the provisions of the Constitution of Liberia, the supreme law of the land. The Constitution of Liberia is unambiguous regarding acts of treason against the Republic of Liberia. Article 76 of the Liberian Constitution clearly defines treasonable activities. Available evidence suggests the Liberian Constitution was brashly transgressed by many individuals, including the present President of Liberia, Madam Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, and several officials of the government, now masquerading throughout Liberia and the free world as law-abiding citizens. Even Dr. Evans Sawyer, chair of the committee which crafted the Liberian Constitution, could not resist the temptation to trash it. We must hold those accountable who transgressed the cardinal law of the land, including but not limited to any statutory provisions. For until and unless Liberians learn to respect their own laws and institutions, it would be foolhardy to expect anyone in the world to respect Liberia, its laws and institutions. And therefore, the people of Liberia must resolve to take ownership of restoring law and order to Liberia. for no amount of international support and donor-driven capacity building schemes will restore to Liberia that which only Liberians can restore to themselves and their country. What I've tried to do in this course of my appearance as chairman, members of the TRC, is to alert the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Liberia and the listening public to the enormity and seriousness of the task at hand. I've tried to put into perspective, from personal experience, historical antecedents of issues requiring urgent attention by all well-meaning Liberians. By these accounts, I challenge Liberians to research information I have provided with a view of recalibrating our national compass to define a national identity and purpose. Surrogates of the invincible hand, the price of gullibility. Chairman Weedeh, members of the TRC, fellow Liberians. Before I sign off at this hearing, I wish to invite your attention to a challenge and to challenge all Liberians to resolve as follows. Liberians for so long have been gullible and often willing, perhaps out of ignorance, to play surrogate for the invisible hand. The old adage that he who falls for everything stands for nothing is the plague of Liberia. In July 1980, the Republic of Sierra Leone hosted the annual OAU Conference of African Leaders, now the African Union is called. President Saka Stevens of Sierra Leone, though and the PRC had taken power in Liberia 4 months earlier, April 1980. Young and inexperienced, I had the privilege of meeting President Saka Stevens for the first time. After the usual round of meetings with various African leaders, including PRC Chairman Doe, President Stevens granted me a rare opportunity to sit with him and listen to his wisdom. Among the many things he said, and I always remember, was this advice: men can't talk everything. You talk some, you leave some. President Saka Stevens was truly a wise man. Today, as I end these hearings, I will talk some and leave some. Let me share some thoughts about how we Liberians, our gullibility as a people has turned us into surrogates of what I term the invisible hand, whose interest is often at variance with Liberians. The role of the churches operating in Liberia needs to be examined, because church leaders in this country were active members, were active players before and during the Liberia civil crisis. For example, the Catholic Church facilitated the exit of the late PRC General Thomas Kuwamba and his wife out of Liberia after the Nema invasion crisis of 1983. It was from the church's residence, to be specific, at the SMA Father's residence in Northeast Washington, D.C., in the United States, that General Thomas Kuwamba left to return to Liberia to stage the failed coup of November 12, 1985. The priest who lived at that residence is currently in Liberia, in the village, holed up in the village in southeastern Liberia, excuse me, after being declared persona non grata by the Republic of Kenya in East Africa. It is an open secret that many Liberians who went to the United States under the Family Resettlement Program fabricated stories to qualify for political asylum and resettlement in the United States of America. It is also no accident that these same fabricated stories of alleged rape, human rights, and other abuses found their way to Liberia, to this TRC, through the Catholic Peace and Justice Commission. You know, we all lived in Ghana. Everybody was at Broom Broom. We heard the stories. Every woman in Liberia was raped. She got excused. Something happened. And these stories, especially that whole group that went to Minnesota, we know them. They know themselves. They're not doing Liberia a favor by disgracing this country because they want to go to some place called America. Liberia has to be worth more than that. After the Pharaoh Kuyangba invasion of November 1985, tension between Liberia and Sierra Leone heightened as PRC Chairman Doe, the other Liberian troops deployed at the Liberia-Sierra Leone border. I will say for the record, for the first time here, you know, sometimes some of us will work effectively when we work, you know, unofficially. Backdoor diplomacy. The countries we try to emulate while they're talking publicly, they're doing backdoor talk. And many times that's effective. People will remember in this town when troops were deployed, they were deployed troops at the Freetown border. Tension was high. I was not foreign minister. I was just another person in the government. I made an unofficial visit to Sierra Leone and again was privileged to meet President Shaka Stevens. The old man, with a remarkable sense of humor, remembered me from the 1980 meeting and said to me, "Tell Chairman Doe he's barking up the wrong tree." And remember, he added, "Man can't talk everything. You talk some, you leave some." I returned to Monrovia and shared with Chairman Doe my conversation with President Stevens. Doe ordered the soldiers withdrawn from the border, and the tension subsided. I'm not taking responsibility for that. I'm just relating one of several incidents. One of the little things I have done, just for your information. I'm not suggesting that that was the solution to the problem, but you want to know my role, I'm sharing that with you. Could the TRC be barking up the wrong tree in its search for the real masterminds of the tragedy in Liberia and West Africa? In posing this question and sharing my experience, I am inviting us all to think, for once, beyond what we see, be it in the newspaper, excuse me, if we can read, or on the television, what we hear and are told by so-called credible sources or government. In late 1990, in Freetown, Sierra Leone, I had an opportunity to meet with Mr. D. Amayolo and other Liberians exiles contemplating the plight of Liberians after the death of President Doe. Mr. Yulo worked at the National Security Agency in Liberia, as most people would call, and claimed he had contact in the American Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, someone he had worked with, or someone who had worked with him at the NSA here in Monrovia, someone he thought he could consult for some advice considering Charles Taylor's alleged Libyan connection. A few days later, Mr. D. Amayulo returned with the following, suggested, according to him, by his CIA contact. Quote, you can organize a resistance movement, an armed resistance movement against Charles Taylor and the Libya-backed MPFL. He quoted his CIA contact as saying, but he continued, it has to be broad-based and the name has to suggest something pertaining to democracy, end of quote. As silly as it may seem, to meet the broad-based requirement, persons other than members of the current ethnic group had to be co-opted, and many persons did join, willingly. Mr. Raleigh Siki of the Kru ethnic group from Riverses was named chairman, and the name United Liberation Movement for Democracy in Liberia, ULIMO, was crafted, meeting the dual requirements of broad-based, multi-ethnic groups and a name suggesting democracy as advised, supposedly by Mr. Yulo's CIA contact. In 1999, in the Republic of Guinea, another broad-based, democracy-toting armed resistance movement, styled Liberians United for Reconciliation and Democracy, LURD, was organized, allegedly supported by the government of Guinea to oust President Taylor from office. Yet, another broad-based armed resistance movement for democracy in Liberia, MODEL, hastened Taylor's departure from Liberia into exile in August 2003. Mr. Chairman, fellow Liberians, I've asked you just think with me. I'm thinking loud, out of the box. Could these organizations, there is something strikingly coincidental about these organizations. They were formed outside of Liberia, broad-based, and the term democracy is embossed in their respective names. Could these organizations have been the surrogates of the invisible hand behind the Liberian conflict and the sub-regional conflict? Could the same person or organization that advised Mr. D. Amayulo in Freetown, Sierra Leone in 1990 still be dispensing free advice to broad-based pro-democracy armed resistance organizations in West Africa? Could these organizations indeed, could we all be surrogates of the invisible hand used unwittingly against ourselves? Many persons, more than 200 prominent Liberians, including National Housing Managing Director Sen Tote, the late, were taken from the free port of Monrovia, where they sought refuge with the ECOMOG forces. They were taken to the Cordwa base of the Independent National Patriotic Front of Liberia, INPFL, and they're murdered in September 1990. To date, to the best of my knowledge, no one, including ECOWAS, under whose aegis ECOMOG operated, the government of the United States, which financed ECOMOG, and whose embassy, the only embassy that remained open during the entire period of the conflict in Liberia, the international community which sanctioned the ECOWAS-led Liberia Peace Initiative, no one ever questioned or requested an inquiry into the massacre of these Liberians. Mr. Chairman, fellow Liberians, Mr. Charles Taylor, we are told, broke jail in the great United States of America and ended up in Liberia by way of Libya. Of the 50 international police offices, Interpol that is, around the world, 8 are on the African continent. 1 is in Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire, from whence Charles Taylor launched his armed invasion into Liberia. Again, to the best of my knowledge, to this day, as we sit here in this destroyed country, without light, without water, without the barest necessities of life, accusing one another of human rights violations, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, no one, absolutely no one, not even the United States, from which Charles Taylor was fugitive, served notice on Interpol that Mr. Taylor was a fugitive at the very least, or seek Taylor's arrest and return to the United States, as the world saw him lead a war that eventually destroyed the entire West African subcontinent. You know, the United States, we boast in Liberia, is Liberia's traditional friend. Mr. Chairman, members of the TRC, my fellow Liberians, I'm just thinking aloud, thinking unthinkable things. But I invite you to think. Think for yourself. Are we being used against ourselves? Think with me. Think anyway. In his testimony before the TRC Commission, Mr. Harry A. Greaves Jr. admitted soliciting and raising funds for the Taylor-led NPFL armed invasion of Liberia in 1989. Mr. Greaves also said, and I quote, "Countries with substantial resources financed the Liberian war," a claim Mr. Harry Greaves had made consistently, the significance of which this TRC seems not to have grasped. The unnamed countries with substantial resources, according to Mr. Greaves, which financed Liberia's destruction, are basking in their success at using Liberians to self-destruct. In this respect, the TRC may be barking up the wrong tree. And on this note, I heed the late President Saka Stevens' advice. Man can't talk everything. You talk some, you leave some. Mr. Chairman, members of the TRC, indeed, varying degrees of offenses were committed by elements of the Liberian populace during the civil conflict. In making this determination, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Liberia should not permit itself, I repeat, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Liberia should not permit itself to become yet another surrogate of the invisible hand. For solutions of Liberia's problem cannot and should not be imposed from without. Today, we have a government that is externally macro-managed, a national economy donor-driven with attached external interest. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Liberia should seek ways to restore peace rather than perpetuate conflict unwittingly. Thank you.